Most men don't realize it's happening until it's already too late. You meet someone. The energy is electric. She laughs at the right moments, asks about your ambitions, tells you that you're different from the other guys she's dated. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a small part of you feels seen, understood, chosen. But here's what nobody wants to say out loud. Some of that attention has nothing to do with you, not with your personality, not with who you are when the money runs out or the lifestyle gets quiet. Some of it is directed at something else entirely, something attached to you, but not you. And the terrifying part is that most men have no idea how to tell the difference while it's happening. They only figure it out later, sometimes years later, after the investment, after the emotional damage, after they've handed over enormous parts of themselves to someone who was never actually interested in those parts. That's what we're going to talk about today. 5 signs that most single men completely overlook. Not because they're stupid, not because they're weak, but because these signs are subtle, psychologically sophisticated, and designed by circumstance to blend in perfectly with the early stages of something that feels real. If you've ever ended a relationship and felt like you didn't really know the person you were with, this is for you. If you're in something right now, and something feels slightly off but you can't explain it, this is for you. And if you've never experienced any of this, but you want the kind of awareness that protects your future, this is absolutely for you. Pay attention, because once you see these patterns, you cannot unsee them. Let's start with something that most people get completely wrong when they think about this topic. Attraction and incentives are not the same thing. Read that again. Attraction and incentives are fundamentally different forces, but they can produce almost identical behavior in the early stages of a relationship. That's what makes this so difficult to detect. Someone who is genuinely attracted to you will pursue you. They'll invest in you. They'll show up for you. But someone who is responding to your incentives, your resources, your status, your lifestyle, your potential, will do almost exactly the same thing. At first, the difference only becomes visible over time, and the window to see it clearly is early, before the emotional investment deepens, before the rationalizations kick in, before you've spent enough time together that you can't distinguish between who they are and who you've started to believe they are. This matters because the human brain is not naturally wired to make that distinction easily. When you feel attracted to someone, when the chemistry feels real, your mind automatically starts filtering information in their favor. Inconsistencies get smoothed over. Warning signs get reframed as quirks. Patterns that would alarm you about a stranger become invisible when applied to someone you're falling for. That's not weakness. That's neuroscience. The same brain chemistry that makes connection feel profound also makes you temporarily less objective, which is exactly why awareness has to come before the emotion gets too loud to hear anything else. So let's talk about the 5 signs. Let's go deep on each one. Because this isn't about becoming paranoid or treating every woman like a suspect. It's about being literate in a language that most men were never taught. The first sign is this: her enthusiasm is tied to what's available, not to who you are. This one is subtle in the beginning. Everything starts normally. She seems engaged, attentive, present. But if you pay attention over time, you'll notice something. Her energy isn't consistent. It rises and falls in ways that don't quite match the natural rhythm of a developing relationship. What it actually tracks is access. When there's an expensive dinner on the table, her warmth increases. When a trip gets mentioned, her enthusiasm spikes. When financial generosity shows up in any form, something in her becomes more available, more affectionate, more interested in deepening the connection. But then something shifts. Life gets busier. The dinners become simpler. You mention that you're cutting back on spending for a while, or that your schedule is tighter, or that you'd rather stay in this weekend. And you notice a change. Not dramatic, not obvious, but real. The texts slow down. The energy drops. The conversations feel a little more effortful. The warmth is still there, but it's dimmer. This is not normal fluctuation. Every relationship has natural ebbs and flows. People have hard weeks, off days, moments when they're less present. That's human. What we're describing is something different. It's a pattern. It's a consistent correlation between the presence of material benefit and the presence of emotional investment. In a genuinely connected relationship, your partner's engagement might vary for many reasons: stress, personal struggles, external circumstances. But the baseline affection, the underlying interest in you as a person, that remains relatively stable. It doesn't vanish when the wallet gets quieter. What you want to pay attention to is the correlation. Not one instance, but the pattern across time. Does her enthusiasm seem to increase around moments of material abundance and decrease around moments of simplicity? That pattern is data, and data doesn't lie, even when everything else about the situation feels complicated. Here's a simple test that many men never think to apply deliberately. Create a period of simplicity on purpose. Not as a game, not as a manipulation, but as an observation. Suggest a quiet night in instead of a reservation. Mention something that implies a temporary financial constraint, even casually. Then watch. Not with suspicion, but with curiosity. Does her interest in you remain? Does she find alternative ways to connect, to create closeness without the external elements? Or does the energy quietly drop? A person who is genuinely invested in you will find a way to you regardless of what's on the table. A person who is primarily invested in the benefits attached to you will find other things to do when the benefits quiet down. The second sign takes us into territory that feels even less obvious in the moment, but becomes unmistakably clear when you step back and look at the whole picture. She consistently brings conversations back to money. Now let's be clear about something. Financial conversations in relationships are normal. They're healthy. Understanding each other's goals, values around money, long-term financial compatibility, all of that is entirely appropriate and even necessary as things get serious. That's not what we're describing. What we're describing is a specific conversational pattern. One where the topics of income, financial status, material goals, and what you're able to provide keep reappearing, almost magnetically, across the majority of your interactions. She might ask about your career trajectory, more than you'd expect for someone who barely knows you. She might casually mention what kind of lifestyle she's used to, or what she's looking for in her future, in ways that involve a lot of detail about money and comfort. She might bring up other couples and frame their success in terms of what the man provides. She might ask probing questions about your ambitions, but the follow-up questions are always about the financial outcome, never about the process, the passion, or the personal meaning behind the work. These patterns can be very easy to dismiss individually. In isolation, any one of these moments sounds like a normal conversation. But when you start noticing the frequency, when you realize that almost every extended conversation loops back to resources and what you can provide, the pattern becomes harder to ignore. Think about the conversations you have with people who are genuinely excited about you. They want to know your stories. They want to understand what shaped you. They're curious about how you think, what you believe, what you find funny, what keeps you up at night. They ask about your life and then follow up with more questions about your life. Now contrast that with conversations where the thread always returns to a similar destination. What do you earn? Where do you see yourself financially in 5 years? What kind of lifestyle you're working toward? What you'd be able to provide if things got serious. The content of repeated conversations reveals the underlying priorities. People talk about what they care about. And when someone's conversational gravity keeps pulling everything back toward resources, that gravity is telling you something. Doesn't mean every question about money is a red flag. It means the aggregate pattern matters. And most men, while they're charmed and emotionally engaged, aren't tracking the aggregate. They're responding to each moment individually without stepping back to look at the whole shape of the dynamic. The third sign is where things start to feel a little more uncomfortable to acknowledge, because this one involves lifestyle expectations, and it often disguises itself as standards, as self-respect, as a woman who knows what she wants. And look, knowing what you want is not a character flaw. Having standards is healthy. The issue isn't the expectations themselves. The issue is the timing and the trajectory. Here's what the sign actually looks like. Very early in the relationship, before any real intimacy has been established, before you've shown each other who you are under pressure, before any real trust or emotional depth exists, certain expectations begin to surface. Expectations about the kind of environment you should be taking her to, the kind of experiences that should be part of the relationship, the level of financial expression that should accompany your affection. It might be a comment about how she doesn't really do casual dates, a story about the last person she was with and the things they did together, told in a way that makes the implication clear. A subtle disappointment that appears when plans are simpler than expected. A tone shift when a restaurant doesn't meet an unspoken threshold. What makes this sign particularly important is the speed of it. In relationships where someone is genuinely attracted to you as a person, expectations develop over time in proportion to the depth of the connection. People earn access to each other's standards. As the relationship deepens, as trust grows, it becomes natural to discuss what both partners need and want. But when lifestyle expectations arrive before the relationship has any real foundation, when the standards are presented as prerequisites rather than as natural developments of a deepening bond, something is off. It suggests that the lifestyle is not an accompaniment to the relationship, it's the point. You also want to pay attention to what happens when expectations aren't met. A person who is invested in you will be disappointed, possibly, but they'll redirect. They'll appreciate the effort behind the gesture. They'll focus on the connection rather than the setting. A person who is primarily invested in the lifestyle will communicate dissatisfaction in ways that are hard to miss, even if they're carefully indirect. The speed and volume of lifestyle expectations early in a relationship is one of the clearest early indicators of what someone actually wants from it. Not because wanting certain things is wrong, but because when someone leads with what they expect to receive before they've offered anything of themselves, it reveals the fundamental structure of how they're approaching the situation. Now we're reaching the middle of this story, and this is where I want to slow down for a moment. Because at this point, some of you might be thinking, this all sounds like cynicism, like a reason to never trust anyone, like an argument for keeping people at arm's length indefinitely. That's not what this is. What we're really talking about is the difference between relationships built on connection and relationships built on exchange. And understanding that difference doesn't make you cynical. It makes you literate. It gives you the ability to recognize what's real and choose it deliberately, rather than stumbling into it by luck or getting burned, learning the hard way. The uncomfortable truth about transactional relationships is that they don't announce themselves. Nobody sits across from you on a first date and says, "I'm here for what you can give me." The structure is subtle. It builds slowly. It uses the mechanics of genuine connection as its surface layer. And that's exactly why awareness matters so much. Because the goal isn't to stop investing. The goal is to invest in the right places. The fourth sign is the one that hurts the most when you finally see it clearly. And it's this: her support is conditional on your success. This one is particularly painful because it often doesn't become visible until a moment of genuine difficulty. You can go months in a relationship without encountering this sign, simply because nothing has tested it yet. And then life delivers a challenging chapter, and everything becomes suddenly, sharply clear. In healthy relationships, support functions as a counterweight to difficulty. When you're struggling, the people who genuinely care about you show up with more intention, not less. They don't need you to be performing at your highest level in order to justify their investment in you. They're invested in you, the person, not the version of you that's winning. But in transactional dynamics, the support architecture is fundamentally different. Because the investment was never in you, it was in what you represent: the stability, the potential, the lifestyle, the outcome you're moving toward. And when that outcome gets temporarily uncertain, when the success slows down, when the stability wobbles, the basis for the investment disappears. What this looks like in practice can be subtle. It might be a shift in her availability during your harder months, a decrease in her enthusiasm for spending time together, more criticism when criticism is least helpful, a kind of emotional withdrawal that she might even frame as giving you space, a reduction in encouragement at the exact moment encouragement would matter most. Or it might be more direct, comments about your situation that feel more evaluative than supportive, comparisons to other people's trajectories that land wrong, a growing sense that she's watching your progress with the eyes of an investor, checking on a portfolio rather than a partner, supporting someone she loves. The test of real connection is difficulty, not success. Anyone can be enthusiastic when things are going well, when the lifestyle is intact, when the resources are flowing, when the status is visible. It's easy to be present. The question is, who stays when the music stops? Who finds a way to see you clearly when the external signals quiet down? This is worth examining not just in the context of romance. Think about anyone in your life. The relationships that have survived your harder seasons are the ones that were real. The ones that didn't were telling you something, even if you didn't want to hear it at the time. If you're in something now and you haven't yet faced a real difficulty together, pay attention when it comes. Pay attention to whether the support increases or decreases. Pay attention to whether your value in her eyes seems to be tied to your output or to your presence. That response will tell you more about the nature of the relationship than everything that came before it. The fifth sign closes this framework in a place that is, in some ways, the most revealing. Because this one is about the future, about what happens when conversations turn toward long-term partnership, shared responsibility, and mutual investment. In genuine relationships, this conversation is about us. It's about what we each bring, what we each need, how we build something together that's larger than what either person could create alone. There's a natural discussion of mutual contribution, of what both people are committing to, of what equality looks like in practice across the unique landscape of this particular partnership. But in transactional dynamics, this conversation tends to remain one-sided in a very specific way. The focus stays on what you provide, what your role looks like, what your obligations are, what the lifestyle should include, what the baseline standard of living needs to be. And when you gently introduce the concept of mutual contribution, when you ask what she's bringing, what she's building, what she's investing, the conversation shifts. It becomes defensive, or abstract, or it pivots back to what you're going to provide. This isn't about keeping score. Healthy relationships aren't score-keeping enterprises. Partners contribute differently at different times. Some contribute more financially, some contribute more emotionally, some contribute more in terms of time and logistics. The specific form of contribution matters less than the underlying orientation. Both people are building toward something shared. What the fifth sign reveals is an orientation that is fundamentally extractive rather than generative. An interest in what the relationship provides rather than what it creates. And that orientation, when it's present, will shape every major decision the relationship makes from that point forward. Financial decisions, life decisions, whether to stay through difficulty, whether to prioritize the relationship when it requires sacrifice. Because here's the simple truth that's worth sitting with. Someone who is in it for what they can gain will leave when the gain diminishes. Someone who is in it for what you build together will stay when things get hard. Because the foundation of what they value is the thing you're building, not the product of what you've already achieved. That distinction is everything. And it's the difference between a relationship that deepens over decades and one that ends the moment the incentives shift. Now, let's bring all 5 of these signs into a single, coherent picture. Because individually, any one of them could be misread, could be a different context, could be a misunderstanding. But when you start seeing multiple signs, when they form a pattern across different situations and different time periods, you're no longer looking at misread signals. You're looking at a structure, enthusiasm that tracks material benefit rather than personal connection, conversations that consistently return to resources and what you can provide, lifestyle expectations that arrive before any real foundation has been built, support that becomes conditional when success becomes uncertain, future conversations that focus on your obligations rather than mutual investment. That's a pattern. And a pattern is information, not a verdict, not a reason to terminate something immediately, but information that should inform how you proceed, how deeply you invest, where you place your trust, and what you choose to build. Here's what I want to leave you with, because this is the part that matters most, and it's the part that most of these conversations never quite reach. Recognizing these signs is not an act of distrust. It's not a decision to protect yourself from connection. If anything, it's the opposite. Because when you can see these patterns clearly, when you're no longer operating from a place of confusion and emotional noise, you become capable of something much more valuable than avoiding the wrong relationships. You become capable of recognizing the right ones. And right relationships exist. They're not rare in the way that cynics want you to believe. There are women who are genuinely interested in who you are rather than what you can provide, who find your humanity more compelling than your bank account, who stay through the difficult seasons because the connection itself is the point, who bring something real to the table and invite you to build something real together. Those relationships are worth everything, and the only way to access them, the only way to give them the investment they deserve, is to be clear-eyed enough to tell them apart from the alternative. Clarity is not coldness. Awareness is not armor. Understanding these patterns doesn't make you harder or more guarded. It makes you more precise. It allows you to direct your time, your energy, your emotional investment toward places where it will actually land, where it will be received and reciprocated, where it will grow into something that makes your life genuinely better. Most men learn all of this the hard way, through experience, through the specific kind of exhaustion that comes from realizing, too late, that you were more invested than the situation ever warranted. But you don't have to learn it that way. You're learning it now. You're reading the map before you enter the territory, and that changes everything about where you end up. So carry these 5 signs with you, not as weapons, not as reasons for suspicion, but as tools for observation. as a framework for staying awake to what's happening in your relational life, as a reminder that your time, your resources, your emotional investment, your future, all of it is worth protecting, not by withholding yourself, but by choosing carefully where you give yourself. Because at the end of it all, the goal isn't to never be vulnerable. Vulnerability is part of what makes love real. The goal is to be vulnerable in the right places, with the right people, in relationships built on something that will hold when everything else gets tested. That's what this awareness gives you. Not safety from connection, but the wisdom to connect in ways that are actually worth it.